He figured it'd be nothing more than a quick stop, a favor for his sister, nothing else. A former Navy SEAL working private security, he was just the ride, driving her to a small animal shelter while her car sat in the shop. No plans beyond that, just killing time, keeping his guard up the way he always did, holding that familiar distance from anything that might crack open the quiet fortress he'd built around himself. Then, a kennel door swung wide. Something small darted out, stumbled across the floor, and clamped onto his pant leg like it had been waiting its whole short life for exactly this. He glanced down, ready to pull away. But the thing held on, and in that still, unremarkable moment, the very thing he'd spent years outrunning had already chosen him. Before we go any further, drop your city in the comments. We genuinely want to know where you're listening from. And if stories like this one speak to something in you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. It was a sharp April morning in Ashford, Montana, the kind of day where winter hadn't quite released its grip, its breath still threaded through the wind, even as pale green shoots pushed stubbornly through wet earth. Caleb Rourke drove with one hand draped over the wheel, the other resting loose near the shifter. His eyes held the road the same way they held security feeds, access points, and strangers who lingered a beat too long near chain-link barriers. He'd left the Navy years back, but certain things didn't leave him. The cropped hair, the scanning eyes. That reflexive habit of mapping every angle in a room before he'd so much as sit down. All of it stayed. His face carried more than age. It carried mileage. The rough stubble lining his jaw got trimmed only when it started catching on collars. These days, he worked site security at a construction outfit, walking the fence line, checking locks, watching trucks roll in and out, logging plate numbers in a small notebook that never left his pocket. Simple work, predictable work, the kind that made sure nothing trailed him home. He meant to keep it exactly that way, regardless of this morning's small detour. Lily sat in the passenger seat, gripping her coffee cup like it was part lifeline, part security blanket. She had a gift, filling silence without being invited to, the sort of person who could open a conversation with a total stranger and walk away knowing their pet's name, their job title, and what they'd eaten for dinner the night before. Her dark blonde hair fell loose around her face, pinned up with more confidence than precision. She looked at the world and saw possibility first. There was a time Caleb had respected that about her. Lately, he mostly worried about keeping her away from smooth-talking strangers with investment schemes. She'd recently adopted a kitten from the shelter, and with her car sitting dead at the mechanics, she'd recruited Caleb to ferry her back. Something about feeding guidelines, paperwork, and why her new cat had declared war on the laundry basket. He'd agreed. Saying no to Lily always cost more energy than giving in. The shelter turned out smaller than he'd expected. Bright, clean, carrying a faint layered scent of disinfectant, kibble, and sun-warmed bedding. Lily made straight for the front desk, her trademark open smile already working the room. Caleb drifted the opposite direction, wandering down a hallway until he reached the small dog section near the back. A bench sat beneath a window, solid wall behind it, clean sightline to the entrance mirrored in the glass. He chose the spot without thinking. His body, still running protocols his conscious mind had stopped issuing years ago. He figured this careful positioning would buy him what had always bored him. Solitude. Stillness. No one close enough to matter. That's where Clara found him. She came around a corner, clipboard braced against her hip, moving with the steady, unhurried calm of someone used to settling frightened animals and anxious people in the same hour. She looked to be somewhere in her mid-30s. Chestnut hair pulled back loosely, clear brown eyes, a face that came alive more fully when she was listening than when she spoke. Quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comes from shyness, something steadier than that. "Are you here with Lily?" she asked. Caleb gave a small nod. "Just driving." "Just waiting," she corrected gently, her eyes moving from the bench to him. He nearly shut the conversation down with something short and final, but the softness in her voice caught him off guard, disarmed him in a way he hadn't expected. So instead, he talked. He told her about a former teammate whose coffee was so ruthlessly strong the rest of the squad swore it could dissolve the finish off a steel hull. A nothing story. That's exactly why he chose it. In Caleb's experience, most women responded to anything military adjacent with a polite smile and eyes already drifting elsewhere. Clara laughed at the right moment, asked whether anyone had actually been brave enough to drink the stuff, then followed with another question, and another. She wasn't humoring him, she was paying attention. "My father always said military coffee served one purpose," she offered. "Nobody was supposed to enjoy it. It existed solely to keep people awake." Something wound tight inside Caleb loosened, just barely. "Was your father in the service?" A nod. "Army. He could fix anything except his own sleep." Caleb looked at her then. Actually looked. "Yeah," he said low. "That tracks." The silence that followed didn't press against him the way silence usually did. It just rested. Clara shifted the clipboard to one arm. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 9, underscore, underscore. Every reflex built across years of chosen isolation told him to say no. Before he could answer, a kennel door behind her clicked open. What came through wasn't so much a charge as a stubborn wobble. A 5-week-old German shepherd puppy, all oversized paws, plush black and tan coat, ears still negotiating their permanent angle. It skidded across the polished floor and headed straight for him with the absolute focus of a creature who'd already made up its mind. Caleb barely had time to straighten before the pup reached his boot, planted both front paws on his leg, and began scrambling upward, like this was simply the logical next step. Then it discovered the keyring hanging from his belt, latched on with the intensity of a sworn mission. Caleb stared. The puppy pulled. The keys didn't budge. The puppy dug in harder, slid back half an inch, then attempted it again, with the solemn gravity of a tiny soldier locked in a battle he was losing but absolutely refused to abandon. A laugh broke free before Caleb could stop it. Short, genuine, rough at the edges from years without practice. From the front desk, Lily spun around so fast her coffee nearly crested the lid. "Caleb!" she called out, eyes wide. "Was that you?" Clara smiled, something private and warm passing across her whole face. "His name is Milo," she said, "and apparently he doesn't bother with formal introductions." Caleb crouched down, and Milo immediately used his wrist as a foothold. "Puppies do that with everyone," he muttered. The words sounded reasonable enough, but the puppy's unwavering certainty told a different story. By the time Lily finished at the desk and came to collect him, Caleb had mostly reassembled his usual composure, or something close to it. He thanked Clara, offered a single nod, walked toward the door. That should have been the end of it. A brief encounter, a small animal, nothing of consequence. Then, a tug at his pant leg. He looked down. Milo had followed him the length of the corridor, both front paws clamped around the fabric of his work trousers, holding on with clumsy, absolute determination. Not biting, not whimpering, just refusing to let go, as though something between them remained unfinished. Caleb stood there, perfectly still, staring at the tiny German shepherd braced against his boot. And for the first time in longer than he cared to measure, something shifted in the silence inside him. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Lily talked the entire way. Her free hand kept rising from the coffee cup to emphasize some new detail about her kitten, its apparent declaration of war against the laundry basket, its open contempt for the expensive food she'd bought, and its unwavering commitment to destroying shoelaces as though they were high-priority targets. Caleb gave the kind of answers that keep a conversation moving without actually being inside it. Short replies, timed well enough, but his mind kept drifting somewhere else entirely. At every red light, through every slow curve in the road, back to that small pressure against his leg, a grip too strong for something so small. He could still feel it. Like something left unfinished. "You're not even listening," Lily said, eyes narrowing. "I am." "Then what did I just say?" "That it's aggressive." "It's a kitten, Caleb. It's not running a street gang." He said nothing. Lily watched him for a beat, then settled back into her seat. A quiet smile crossed her face, the kind someone gets when a piece clicks into place. "That dog chose you." His eyes stayed on the road. "It's a puppy. They choose everyone." "Mm-hmm," she murmured, unconvinced. "Didn't look like it was choosing everyone. Looked like it was choosing you." He didn't argue. Not because she was right, because he couldn't find a clean way to say she wasn't. And that, more than it should have, got under his skin. By the time he pulled up to her place, she'd circled back to the cat, the appointments, the evening plans. The small, ordinary things that fill a life. Caleb nodded along, waited until she was safely inside, then pulled away. The construction site met him the way it always did. Half-built walls, pallets of materials, the low residual hum of machinery that had gone quiet hours ago. Night shifts meant fewer bodies, more silence, long stretches of the same thing repeated in sequence. He walked the perimeter, checked every lock, logged the last delivery truck that had cleared the gate before sundown. Each motion automatic, muscle memory, carrying what his mind didn't need to attend to. It should have been enough. Somewhere around 9:30, he sat in the cramped office beside the gate, flipping through his notebook. Plate numbers, timestamps, notes that barely warranted writing, but always got written anyway. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it ring once, then picked up. __, quote _24, __. He didn't answer right away. "You walked off with one of our markers yesterday," she went on, voice easy. "It's got the center's name printed on it. Figured you'd want to return it before I get written up for lost supplies." He looked down at the desk. The marker sat there. He hadn't meant to take it. "Quote 27, quote," he said. "Quote 28, quote," she replied. A short silence. Then, "Quote 29, quote." A message came through. He opened it. A photo. Milo, with his head halfway buried in a food bowl, tilted at an angle that suggested he'd started eating and then forgotten why he was doing it. One paw sat inside the bowl, staking a claim for later. Caleb stared at the image longer than he meant to. "He does that?" Clara's voice followed. Caleb shifted back in his chair. She asked. Another message appeared. A second photo, Milo curled into an awkward knot beside the same bowl, dead asleep, as though the sheer effort of not eating had drained everything out of him. Caleb typed, stopped, deleted it, typed again. _35, quote. He stared at the words a moment before hitting send. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. _36, quote. A pause. Then Caleb typed once more. __, quote, _37, __. Clara didn't respond right away this time. Not enough, she wrote back. We're trying different things. He looked at the photo again. That small body. Too still. He locked the screen, set the phone face down on the desk. A minute later, he picked it up again, as if his hand had moved without consulting him. The rest of the shift dragged in a way it usually didn't. Nothing happened. No incidents worth logging. But he missed a camera rotation. Wrote the same plate number twice before catching the duplicate. No one else would have noticed. He did. By the time his shift ended, the eastern horizon held the first pale suggestion of morning. Another day, beginning the way they all did, except this time, something faint refused to settle. A low hum beneath the routine. He drove home, slept in broken fragments for a few hours, then got back on the road, heading toward the site the way he always did. At the fork near the town's outer edge, the road split clean in two, left toward the construction site, right toward the animal sanctuary. Caleb eased off the gas. The light flipped green, and he swung right, pointing the truck toward the sanctuary before second thoughts had a chance to catch up. A few hundred yards down that road, his phone finally buzzed. "Rourke, where are you?" "Denny." Caleb didn't look away from the windshield. A pause. Then the reply came back, sharper this time. Caleb fired back, killing the exchange before it could sprawl any further. By the time he pulled into the sanctuary lot, he'd already built a framework in his head. Walk in, hand back the marker, quick look around, leave. Simple enough. The framework collapsed almost immediately. Clara glanced up the second he stepped through the door. He didn't eat much this morning? That was all it took. Caleb followed her without a single question, though something quiet and persistent was forming in the back of his mind, an understanding that this visit had nothing to do with a marker anymore. He stepped into the hushed room beside Clara, already aware he'd crossed some unspoken line that morning. The marker sat in his pocket, but it had stopped being the reason he was here. Milo was awake, pacing in tight, uneven loops until he caught Caleb's presence. Then he stopped. No hesitation, just that same honest, uncomplicated approach. Caleb dropped into a crouch, one hand draped across his knee. "You're supposed to eat," he said, low, more reflex than real expectation. Milo ignored him completely. The puppy nosed forward, then zeroed in on Caleb's jacket pocket. Before Caleb could intervene, Milo hooked the edge with his teeth and yanked free a crumpled, slightly battered receipt from the job site. Worthless by any measure, but to Milo, apparently, a treasure beyond reckoning. He clamped down and bolted. Caleb blinked, then gave chase without thinking. 46. Milo didn't run far, just far enough to make it a game. His paws skidded on the floor as he adjusted his grip. His tail swung with steady purpose. The receipt streamed behind him like a captured flag. For a moment, Caleb just stood there, watching. Then something broke loose. A laugh, louder than it had any right to be, unguarded, the kind that slips past every wall a person has built. It caught him off guard as much as anyone. Clara didn't step in. She simply observed, and something shifted behind her expression. Subtle, quiet, but unmistakable. Caleb finally moved forward, reaching down for the paper. This time, Milo let it go easily, as if the point had already been made. Caleb asked, shaking his head. Clara answered. Caleb exhaled softly through his nose, folded the scrap, and slid it back into his pocket. The room settled again, but the texture of the silence had changed. His phone rang. He didn't need to check the screen. Caleb stepped to the side and picked up. "Rourke, where are you?" No greeting, no warm-up. Pure Denny. "You were supposed to be here 40 minutes ago. I've got a driver asking questions I don't have answers to." "I know," Caleb said. "I'm not coming in right now." A beat of dead air. "What?" "I'm taking the morning off. Personal." "Are you serious?" Denny's voice went tight. Quote 57. Quote 58. Caleb replied, steady as a level. Quote 59. Quote. Silence held the line for a long moment. Quote 60. Quote, Denny said. Quote 61. Quote, another pause. A short breath released on the far end. Quote 62. Quote 63. The call dropped. Caleb lowered the phone slowly, eyes lingering on the dark screen for a beat before he pocketed it. When he turned back, Clara hadn't moved. But she wasn't pretending she hadn't heard every word either. "You're going to have to deal with that," she said. Not a warning. Just a fact, laid bare. "I always do." She gave a single nod, then let her weight rest against the side of the enclosure. "My dad used to spend hours fixing fences," she said. Not because anything was broken, just because it gave him an excuse not to talk to people. Caleb let out a short breath. "I'm not hiding." "Didn't say you were." He looked at her. She held his eyes without effort. "You're just remarkably good at showing up in places nobody expects to find you." The words landed somewhere they shouldn't have. Caleb didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped instead. Milo had settled beside his boot again. Not climbing this time, not pulling for attention, just there. That was new. Caleb breathed out slow, then straightened. "What do I need to sign?" Clara didn't respond immediately, as though she needed a beat to confirm she'd heard him right. "You mean that?" Caleb gave one nod. "Yes." There was no grand speech leading up to it, no single flash of clarity he could point to. The decision had formed somewhere in the background, quietly, the way certain things do. Clara stepped away from the enclosure and walked toward the desk. "All right," she said, her voice level. "We can start the paperwork." The process moved fast. A few forms, a handful of questions, most of them simple. Caleb answered without pausing, signed where he needed to, didn't let himself think too hard about what any of it meant. By the time he finished, Milo had already claimed the patch of floor near his feet as sovereign ground. When everything was done, Clara handed him a small packet. Basic care instructions, feeding schedule, emergency numbers. Caleb took it, eyes passing over the pages without fully registering them. Quote 76. Quote 77, she asked. He looked down at the puppy, then back at her. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 78, underscore, underscore. Clara held his gaze another moment, then gave a small nod. Caleb lifted Milo carefully, still not quite used to the weight, and turned for the door. He didn't head straight home. Instead, he pulled into a small supply shop at the edge of town. The place smelled faintly of hay and rubber mats, shelves lined with things he hadn't thought about in years. A middle-aged clerk stood behind the counter and glanced up as Caleb walked in with the puppy. Quote, 79, quote, the man asked. Caleb hesitated. Quote, 80. Quote, he left with more than he'd planned. 2 stainless steel bowls, a small blanket, a chew toy, formula milk. The clerk swore he'd need. At the register, when the number came up, Caleb pulled out his wallet without much thought. Quote, 81. Quote, the clerk offered. Quote, 82. Quote, Caleb said. The man gave him a look, the kind that said he'd heard that line before. Caleb didn't elaborate. Outside, Milo shifted in his arms, settling deeper, as if the question of where he belonged had already been answered. Caleb looked down at him, then at the road ahead. For the first time in longer than he could measure, going home didn't feel like the only option left. Milo arrived at the house on a grey afternoon that carried the smell of damp earth and sawdust. Caleb set the carrier in the entryway and unlatched the door, bracing for a burst of nervous energy, or at least a few cautious steps into the unknown. Instead, the puppy walked out with startling composure and began surveying the place like it had been hired for an inspection. He stopped at Caleb's boots first, sniffing each one with professional focus. Then moved to the old radio on the lower shelf, the work jacket hanging near the door, and finally the untied lace on Caleb's right boot, which he pawed once, as if noting its irresponsible condition for the record. Caleb stood back, arms crossed, trying not to hover, failing completely. He hadn't understood how deeply quiet the house had grown over the years, until something small started moving through its rooms with quiet purpose. Milo ignored the new toy Caleb had bought him, walked past the folded blanket on the floor, bypassed the water bowl for a solid 30 seconds, only to discover a single work sock half spilling from the laundry basket. With the savage triumph of the conqueror seizing spoils, he wrenched the toy loose. 3 confident strides toward the living room. But he misjudged the lip between rooms, pitched forward, and crumpled into a graceless pile. Caleb inhaled sharply, a thread of worry pulling tight. But Milo was already upright. Rope toy still locked in his jaw, he radiated a wounded composure, the kind only very young dogs and very principled old men carry after an unplanned fall. Caleb's laugh came before he could stop it. It hung in the room longer than he expected. That first evening revealed itself in small, quiet increments. Milo discovered the hypnotic movement of shoelaces, the merciless solidity of chair legs, and the irresistible gravity of Caleb's kitchen, which warranted 3 separate expeditions. He tasted some food, lapped at some water, then folded himself into an awkward knot of sleep beside the sofa. Caleb should have been answering work emails, sorting through the stack of unopened mail. Instead, he sat watching the shallow rise and fall of a puppy's ribs. When night settled over the house, he assumed Milo would drift toward his blanket or the warm air bleeding from the heating vent. But after a slow, unhurried sweep of the hallway, the pup stationed himself in front of the only closed door in the house, and stayed. Caleb knew that door well. He'd built an entire habit around avoiding it, the way a person favors one knee, roots around scar tissue. Not dramatically, just with enough care to never brush against it by accident. Quote, _83, he said, sharper than a puppy deserved. He dangled the toy, tapped it against the floorboards, offered the blanket a second time. Milo acknowledged each attempt with courteous disinterest, then turned his eyes back to the silent door. Caleb stood in the hall, feeling something tighten inside him that had nothing to do with a 5-week-old dog. Quote, _84, Milo lowered himself flat, chin on paws, unmoved. Somewhere near midnight, Caleb surrendered the standoff. He opened the door. Stale cardboard, still air, boxes stacked along one wall, a folding chair posted near the window like a forgotten sentry, the remnants of another life packed into this room and left to gather silence. Milo went in first. No hesitation, no ceremony, walked directly to the chair and climbed onto it as though he'd been heading there all along. Caleb stood in the doorframe. Then he crossed into the room and lowered himself to the floor. He pulled the nearest box close, lifted the lid. He didn't dig through what was inside. No grand reckoning was necessary. One opened box was enough. One choice to stay in the room instead of backing out. That was enough. The days that followed shifted in small, almost imperceptible ways. Easier to absorb because they never demanded acknowledgement. Clara started coming by more often, always under the pretense of checking on Milo. Cornbread one visit, waffles the next. Once, a small bag of treats she swore Milo would hate if he had any self-respect at all. Caleb told her she was disrespecting his dog on his own land. Clara said Milo looked like he'd survive. Their conversations stretched longer without either of them noticing. He told her about work, the guys who wore toughness like armor around the heavy equipment but fell apart over paperwork. The strange hush that would sometimes drop over the job site when wind threaded through open framing. Clara offered her own stories. Her father, who came back from service, carrying things he never named. Her mother's quiet observation that soldiers could endure almost anything until someone showed them uncomplicated kindness. Caleb didn't answer right away. He watched Milo chewing the corner of a blanket with absolute moral conviction. That doesn't seem fair, he said finally. Probably not, Clara replied, but it's still true. What caught him off guard wasn't how quickly Milo adapted. It was the slow recognition that Caleb had begun organizing his entire day around coming home. He stopped lingering at the construction site, manufacturing excuses to recheck locks or review footage no one had asked for. He finished his shift and came home. Home, a word that used to mean nothing more than a roof and a lock, had started to breathe. One evening, he walked in from work, sleeves chalked with dust, a low ache pulsing behind his eyes. He didn't make it past the kitchen, just sank to the floor, too spent to even think about food. Milo crossed the room on clumsy paws, climbed into his lap, turned once, and settled with the absolute certainty of someone who had already decided where he belonged. Caleb laid a hand across the puppy's back. Quote, 88, quote, he said quietly. Clara was standing in the doorway. She'd let herself in with the spare key Lily had insisted on leaving, called it common sense. In her hands, a bakery box. She caught his words and answered them without hesitation. Maybe you were the one who needed to be found. Caleb looked from Milo to her. Something shifted inside him, not dramatic, not loud, just a loosening. The constant machinery of having to justify everything before it was allowed to matter ground to a stop. A few days later, Lily showed up to find Clara already in the kitchen. Milo was passed out on a heap of unfolded laundry, a small emperor sprawled across conquered territory. Lily took it all in, then turned to Caleb with a grin so satisfied it bordered on smug. "I only meant to set you up with a woman," she said. "Nobody warned me I'd have to set you up with a dog, too." Caleb shook his head, but the smile was already there. "You really went above and beyond." For a long time, he'd carried the quiet belief that Milo had made a poor choice. A man who lived by rigid routines, locked doors, and carefully measured distances, that was no fit home for something that needed love. But with every day the puppy spent under his roof, the truth grew harder to deny. Milo hadn't chosen wrong at all. He had walked straight to the part of Caleb that had gone dark years ago. And with nothing but presence, unhurried, unforced, he had opened a door Caleb couldn't reach on his own. Not every transformation announces itself. Some of the deepest shifts arrive so quietly we nearly miss them, until we feel their weight settle into place. Caleb thought he was adopting a puppy. What he was really doing was letting himself be led towards something he'd spent years avoiding. And maybe that's how grace works. Not by wiping the past clean, but by setting something soft and living directly in our path. Something small enough to make one step forward feel possible. If this story brought someone to mind, consider reaching out. Even something small, a call, a shared memory, a single, honest word. It's not the size of the gesture that matters. It's whether you mean it. If you'd like to share your own reflections, your own experience, this is a place for that.